Listen closely. Most of you aren't suffering from a catastrophic collapse. You're enduring a silent drift, a systemic misalignment of your internal compass that I call neurocognitive atrophy. It's not a bang, it's a slow leak of purpose. Think about the rip at Tamarama at dawn. The surface is deceptive. It looks like a path of least resistance. There's no siren. You don't notice the directional displacement until the shoreline is a kilometer away and the current has stripped you of your agency. In the Sydney hustle, we rely on the she'll be right defense. It's a psychological sedative. Every micro-compromise you make, skipping the deep work for the shallow scroll, is a breach of your cognitive sovereignty. You're not relaxing, you're conceding. The drift begins in the dark. Your digital tether is already active before your feet hit the floor. This is the first failure of your circadian boundary, a surrender of your morning prime to the global attention economy. Your retina hasn't even adjusted to the morning light before you've surrendered your dopaminergic baseline to an algorithm. You aren't tired from work. You're exhausted from constant neural hijacking before you've even brushed your teeth. The "I'll start tomorrow" loop is a neurochemical betrayal. When you constantly negotiate with your potential and lose, you suffer from cognitive dissonance erosion. Eventually, your internal executive function stops listening to your commands because your behavior has proven your promises are void. You haven't just delayed, you've dismantled your self-trust. You look up from your device at Flinders Street Station, and the clock has jumped 5 years. The she'll be right armor has rusted through. You aren't actually navigating. You're just vibrating in place while the calendar leaves fall in a blur. A decade can evaporate when you trade your focus for digital convenience. Here's the gut punch. You aren't lazy. Laziness is a lack of effort, but you are drained. You're exhausted because you've been sprinting on a dopaminergic hamster wheel. This is a systemic hijacking of your attentional architecture. You're burning through your soul's fuel for a reward that doesn't exist in the real world. Look at the Manly Ferry, a harbor of world-class beauty, yet every head is bowed to a glass rectangle. We have become emotionally occupied while remaining spiritually motionless. You are reacting to a curated world, but you've ceased to influence your own. You're out in the deep water, and you didn't even pack an oar. The most terrifying part of the rip current is its absolute silence. There's no crash of waves to warn you. By the time you realize you're out of your depth, the shoreline of your dreams is just a thin gray line on the horizon. You're tired because you're fighting a drift you refuse to acknowledge. You are caught in the triple threat loop: high-velocity busyness, hyper-palatable entertainment, and chronic neural exhaustion. It is the modern trinity of failure, keeping you tethered to the shallow end while the ocean of your potential recedes into the horizon. Let us drop the "she will be right" act for a second. Deep in your gut, beneath the caffeine and the white noise of the commute, you feel it. Your baseline is fractured. You are not just tired, you are fundamentally misaligned with your own biological purpose. You look in the mirror after a long shift in Barangaroo or South Bank, and you do not recognize the pilot. It feels as though your cognitive sovereignty has been outsourced to an algorithm, like your mind no longer belongs to you. I spent years in that same drift, waiting for the click, waiting for some external event to grant me the clarity to swim back to shore. But the rip current does not negotiate. It simply carries you further out while you wait for a sign that is never coming. We stack our nightstands with productivity Bibles, hoping for a spontaneous neurological reset. It is a myth. You will not wake up one morning suddenly optimized. Clarity is not a gift. It is a violent reclamation of your focus against a system designed to keep you drifting. You're waiting for the optimal avatar to spawn that mythical version of yourself who effortlessly skips the snooze button. It's a dopaminergic delusion. Discipline isn't a reward for self-actualization. It's the kinetic cost of entry. If you're waiting for the click of alignment, you're just rotting in the rip. Look around the CBD. Most adults are just practitioners of high-functioning chaos. They aren't executing a vision. They're performing metabolic improvisation. They're white-knuckling the steering wheel, praying the drift doesn't hit the rocks before the weekend. That "she'll be right" attitude? It's a defensive mechanism for the exhausted. They carry the flat whites like a talisman against the void. Perfectly pressed shirts, curated LinkedIn profiles, and eyes that haven't seen a moment of genuine presence in years. Quietly. Even the blokes in the corner offices, even the power dressers in the boardroom, especially them. They've just optimized the mask while their cognitive sovereignty is being auctioned off to the highest bidder. They are the ultimate victims of the silent drift. We've been sold a flawed sequence of change. You think confidence is the fuel you need to start. It's an epistemic error. Confidence isn't an input, it's the exhaust of a job well done. You don't feel your way into action. You act your way into feeling. You are standing on the shoreline of your potential, waiting for a surge of self-belief that simply isn't coming. That is the great Australian lie, the idea that you need to feel like a legend before you behave like one. It is back to front. You do not wait for the tide to turn. You swim until you find the channel. Belief is not a prerequisite. It is a retrospective realization. Listen closely. Confidence is not a personality trait. It is an internal accounting system. It is the byproduct of a positive balance in your integrity ledger, the compounding result of keeping those micro promises you have been breaking since last Tuesday. You want to trust yourself in the deep water? Stop defaulting on your internal debt today. We need to redefine discipline. It is not some corporate rise and grind productivity metric for the LinkedIn crowd. It is your psychological architecture. It is the scaffolding you build to prevent your identity from collapsing into the silent drift. When you act, you are not just ticking a box, you are re-anchoring your self-trust into reality. Every second you spend overanalyzing the grand vision is a second you lose to the rip. The big picture is often just a sophisticated form of procrastination. Your survival depends on micro-volition, the tiny, sharp pivots that happen right now. The grand vision does not save the drowning man. The next stroke does. It is 5 a.m. in a freezing Melbourne winter. Your neurological baseline is screaming for the comfort of the duvet. This is the moment of limbic decoupling. You do not need a vision board or a morning mantra. You need the raw, visceral defiance of standing up when your biology demands you stay down. That is where the drift ends. You wake up in a Sydney terrace or a Melbourne flat. The scroll is the siren song of the drift. Break it. This is micro-volition, choosing the brisk morning air over the digital narcotic. It is the first strike against your biological comfort, a refusal to let the algorithm dictate your nervous system's baseline. Sit on a bench near the harbor, no podcasts, no distraction, just the raw friction of your own thoughts. This is limbic decoupling in action. You are severing the cord between the impulse to numb and the reality of your stagnation. It's uncomfortable because it's real. Society sees a bloke sitting still. Your brain sees a structural overhaul. These invisible moments of restraint are where you rebuild your psychological architecture. You are not just resisting a habit. You are recoding your identity's operating system to value presence over dopamine. Listen closely. Motivation is a physiological addiction. It is a chemical spike that vanishes the moment the pressure of reality mounts. Discipline is not a feeling. It is the only sustainable infrastructure. Stop waiting for the vibe to change and start building the cage for your impulses. The self-help industry is nothing more than a dopaminergic casino. They sell you the high of feeling like a winner without the cost of actually winning. Chasing motivation is just another form of the silent drift, dressed up in a more expensive suit. It is time to stop consuming and start constructing. This is the junk food of the mind-parasitic motivation that triggers a dopaminergic spike without inducing a single ounce of neurological friction. Realize this. The architects of micro-volition don't trend. They aren't aesthetic. They look remarkably ordinary because their energy isn't being bled dry by the performance of discipline. No ring lights, no curated soundtracks, just the raw decoupling of the limbic system from the pathological need for external validation. True discipline is the 5 a.m. frost in Western Sydney. It is the invisible routine that yields zero social currency. It is the refusal to let the she'll be right mentality mask your actual cognitive atrophy. Success is not a surge. It is a siege against the rip current of mediocrity. Again tomorrow, again tomorrow, again tomorrow. You think freedom is a wide-open horizon with no fences? Wrong. In the Sydney sprawl, that is just a recipe for aimless drift. True sovereignty is forged in the repetition. It is the rigid architecture of a schedule that prevents your life from collapsing into a formless heap. You do not find freedom by chasing every whim. You build it by walling off the noise. Your routine is not a cage. It is the hull of the boat that keeps the rip from dragging you out to sea. Here is the neurobiological pivot. You must decouple execution from affect. If you only move when the vibe is right, you are a slave to your limbic system's fickle weather. Real stability is when the she'll be right excuse dies. It is performing the high-value behavior when your brain is screaming for a duvet day. That is when the drift stops. When your volition is a non-negotiable directive, not a fleeting feeling. But look around. The modern environment isn't a predatory shark. It is a warm, shallow tide. Most distractions in Melbourne or Perth do not look like threats. They look like conveniences. They are designed to be frictionless. They work precisely because they do not trigger your survival instincts. They just slowly, politely, numb your edge until you have realized you have drifted 3 beaches away from your goals. Nobody wakes up and decides to ruin their life in a single dramatic blaze of glory. It is never the big explosion. It is the silent erosion. It is death by 1,000 micro-concessions. One skipped session, one more hour on the scroll, one extra long lunch. Each one is a tiny cut to your future self. You are not failing in a way that alerts the senses. You are just leaking potential until there is nothing left but salt and regret. Food delivery apps at 10 p.m., Netflix autoplaying the next dopamine hit, the ergonomic sofa that swallows your ambition. These aren't rewards, they are invisible escapes. 1,000 tiny trapdoors designed to keep you sedated, while the rip current of mediocrity carries you further from the shore. You are not tired from working. You are exhausted from the constant, low-level effort of avoiding your own greatness. Let's get one thing straight. The algorithmic landscape does not want your wisdom. It wants your reflex. In our high-paced hubs from Barangaroo to South Bank, we've been sold the lie that speed equals progress. The modern world rewards immediate reaction, the instant reply, the mindless scroll, and it actively punishes deep reflection. If you aren't reacting, the system views you as a technical error. Watch the twitch. It's a phantom limb response for the digital age. You aren't even aware you're doing it anymore. This is the decay of focus. Silence has become a hostile environment. We've been conditioned to view boredom not as a fertile ground for growth, but as a physical threat. It's an unbearable itch you can't scratch because your brain has lost the ability to process stillness. You're exhausted because you're fighting a war against a silence you should be mastering. Listen to me. If 5 minutes alone with your own thoughts feels threatening, that is not a character flaw. It is not personal weakness. It is systemic conditioning. You have been engineered to fear the very stillness required to see the rip current pulling you out to sea. This isn't just bad behavior. It's a structural hijack of your sovereignty. But the moment you stop reacting, the tide shifts. When you protect your attentional capital like it's the last drop of water in a drought, you stop being a passenger to the drift. We are moving from the chaotic noise of the city to the resolute fortress of the focused mind. This is where we stop drifting and start swimming parallel to the shore. Look at the posture of the modern workforce in the CBD. It is a collective bow to the algorithm, a physical manifestation of what I call the digital cervical flexion. Even at the local pub, the she'll be right attitude is a mask. We are physically present, but our neural bandwidth is being harvested. We are mentally scattered across the digital ether, leaking attentional capital at every swipe. This is the core pathology of the silent drift. We are vastly overstimulated by high-frequency dopamine triggers, but we are severely emotionally underfed. We have high-speed internet, but zero internal velocity. Underneath the noise, everyone is desperately searching for the exact same thing: cognitive sovereignty, the absolute authority to command your own focus before the rip current of systemic conditioning pulls you out to sea. I had to realize that failure used to terrify me, not because of the social shame, but because failure creates a vacuum. It removes the noise and exposes the reality that I was moving nowhere. We need to address the ego gap. It's that brutal, unbridgeable chasm between the curated avatar you've projected onto the world and your actual metabolic baseline. You're operating in a state of high-fidelity delusion while your reality is stuck in the silt of the Yarra. Most blokes in Sydney or Melbourne spend their entire cognitive bandwidth protecting that ego from the discomfort of the truth. They engage in performative resilience, but they're slowly becoming strangers to their own biology. They're drifting out to sea, waving at a shore they no longer recognize. The uncomfortable truth? Growth is humiliating. It is a violent ego dissolution that strips you bare on the shoreline. If you aren't prepared to look like a complete novice, you'll never transcend your current limitations. You have to embrace the friction of being average. You have to drop the heavy weights of expectation and start with the empty bar. It's the gritty, unglamorous work of restructuring your default behavior when no one is watching. Enter neuro votes. Every micro decision you make isn't just a fleeting moment. It's a physiological vote for the identity you're colonizing. You don't find your sovereignty. You legislate it into existence through the sheer volume of your repetitions. Every 2 a.m. scroll is a neurovote for your own obsolescence. It is the easy path, the she'll be right, surrender to the algorithmic tide. Choosing friction, turning the device off, facing the silence is a legislative act against the drift. You are either lubricating your slide into the rip, or you are building the break wall. Your future isn't some grand cinematic event waiting for you in a Sydney boardroom. It is completely hidden inside the granular, boring grit of your ordinary routines. We fetishize the big win, but cognitive sovereignty is won in the trenches of your mundane behaviors, not your loud ambitions. Step closer. Listen. No one is coming to rescue your attention. Not the HR department, not your local MP, and definitely not the next influencer on your feed. In the coastal rip of the modern grind, you are the only lifeguard on duty for your own mind. If you don't swim against it now, You're just debris. You must make an executive decree that your life deserves your undivided presence. It won't be a flawless performance. It will be messy and it will hurt your ego. But you must decide to inhabit your own existence completely or spend the rest of it as a passenger in a vessel you no longer steer. Discipline is not a punishment for your failures. It is the recovery of your soul. Return to yourself, one quiet, high-friction decision at a time.